Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library Podcast, where we sit down with the people who give shape, texture, and voice to life on the North Fork of Long Island. Some are rooted here by generations, others arrived by chance or choice, but all carry with them a piece of the story. We talk about what's changing, what's worth holding on to, and the currents of history, both quiet and loud, that run through this place. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 126, we sit down with Joyce Culver, a photographer and educator, and a lifelong observer of the human experience. Born in Manhattan and raised in Ardsley, New York, Joyce grew up in a creative household that encouraged her curiosity and visual instincts. She studied at SUNY Buffalo, where formative mentors helped shape her early voice, and later returned for an MFA at Rochester Institute of Technology in photography, solidifying her commitment to the medium. Over the decades, Joyce has remained a keen and compassionate witness, whether capturing queer life in 1980s New York, documenting her father's Alzheimer's journey, or photographing countless public figures at the 92nd Street Y. Her lens is one of empathy, patience, and quiet intensity, with work now in the collections of MoMA and the Amon Carter Museum, and after more than 40 years teaching at Columbia, SVA, and Nassau Community College, Joyce reflects on a career spent looking closely and helping others learn to see. So I hope you enjoy episode 126 with Joyce Culver. This episode was recorded June 18th, 2025. Thank you so much for coming on the Floyd Memorial Library Podcast today. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Oh, you're welcome, Christopher. It's great to be here, and I look forward to hear what your questions might be.
Thank you. Well, usually in the beginning, I like to start off with your background. If you could tell us where you were born and raised.
Sure. I was born in New York City. But quickly, my father built a house, and we moved to Ardsley, which is a suburb about a half an hour north of New York. And he built a house, which was then really like the country. And I lived there, until I went to college. Ardsley is a very small village, kind of like Greenport, but people were moving north, and it was around 1950, so we were in the 50s, and a lot of people did move to Long Island then too, to places like Levittown, but my father and mother wanted to go north, and that's what they did, and I loved it there. We actually had deer, and a lot of really natural living things that I was around and loved, especially tadpoles and grasshoppers and butterflies and that kind of thing. So, yeah, it was lovely.
And then even just going back, I was curious how far back you can trace your ancestry, whether on your mother's or father's side.
Well, that's a good question, because my grandmother came from a farm. She was born in Germany. My grandparents, she was the only one that came from Europe. The rest of them came from here. They were born here. But I am half Irish and half German. And my grandmother, who came from Germany in the late 1800s, she was, I think, 14 when she came over. And it's so amazing that she could make her way. She worked in a house where she was a maid, and eventually her sisters came over, so there was a family thing where they married and then were able to have their own homes. So that's my background. My one grandmother was very wonderful, and she lived with us for the whole time. So it was my father's mother, and she came to live with us. My mother did not like that. Ultimately, my mother would always say, "You can't have two cooks in the kitchen." So my mother the privacy issue was an issue, even though the home, my grandmother had her own bedroom and was on the second floor. She had her own, what she liked to do, which was she had a garden in the back. She was the one who really raised me. My mother had to work. My mother worked in a slip factory, folding slips in Dobbs Ferry. And I was probably around 7 when my mother kind of returned to the house and did not work, and then gave birth to my sister. So there were 2 of us, a little over 7 years apart. But I love my grandmother. My grandmother had more of a disposition, as do I. I think I'm easygoing. But, of course, don't get me riled up or I could become my mother. My mother had a fuse, let's say, that you didn't want to play with.
And what did your dad do for work?
Well, my father, and I didn't realize this until I got older, my father had been in the arts, but decided he went to Pratt, and he then decided to become a New York City fireman because he thought he'd have a steady income. And he was not having a steady income as a commercial artist. So he did that for 20 years. But while he was at the fire department, he taught himself woodworking by starting off with making small furniture, and then decided to buy land with a partner and build houses. I don't know how he taught himself to do that, but he did that in Westchester, which was where Ardsley is. He would build a house when he wasn't at the fire department. So I think my father was incredibly industrious and very smart, extremely smart, and very quiet in some ways, but he did. I don't see how he even did the fire department thing and building houses at the same time. And also, I would have to say my father is my idol for that reason, because he also loved his family, and my mother and father were together for 59 years. Wow. So he didn't fool around, as far as I know. Family was very important to him, and he provided, for me, especially me, because I went to college and they paid for that. So, but my father taught me, my father was still in the arts and still kind of doing artistic things. So, of course, I watched him and copied him. So, yeah.
And did both of your parents grow up in New York City or in that area?
My mother and father were from the Bronx, and they lived in the Bronx when they were first married. They loved it there. My mother used to talk about the Italians and, how she used to commiserate with people that she, when they were in an apartment. She loved Italian food. And they were really from the Bronx, with a Bronx way of being, let's say. But they didn't speak the way some Bronx people speak. Like, my mother had an uncle that would say, toity-toyed and toyed, and for 33rd and 3rd. Or, the toilet has to be fixed,
Yeah.
instead of toilet. So that was him. My mother didn't speak like that. My mother was very well read. But she did not have, she didn't go further than, in fact, she dropped out of high school.
Mm.
But my mother was not dumb, and she was speaking about being, my mother was definitely a sharp cookie when it came to managing my father's business.
Mm-hmm.
So with his building business, and he also did cabinets and things like that, she handled the business and handled the books.
Mm-hmm.
So they were a pretty good team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you think it was they're moving out more towards Westchester? Is that to just get more space, or from where because you were born in New York City and that area, so
Right.
just
Somehow my father valued the idea of having property, like he bought the land first and then he built the home. Somehow they valued, I think, the space.
mm-hmm.
Because apartment living was not really something I think they wanted. I think they wanted to better themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they could have probably bought a house in the Bronx.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
who knows? I mean, maybe then they were more expensive. I don't know. But that's a good question. My father, I think, somehow did value nature. So I think that may be the reason that they did that. And maybe privacy.
Mm-hmm. And for you, how was that for you growing up in that neighborhood or environment as a child, and what activities would you do outside? Or?
Well, I think growing up, it was great when I was younger. And as I grew up, I would catch butterflies, and I'd go to the streams and find a tadpole, which I would capture. And then all of a sudden it would change into, I think tadpoles change into something. Oh, frogs, they do.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the frog would start to appear and the body would change, and I'd notice it. So and I would dig in the dirt, and I have to say, I think it probably definitely formed me for loving natural living things, and so that was great. In high school, I had a hard time because a lot of people up in Ardsley, some of the people, there was a banker on my street, he would go into New York. A lot of people would go into New York and have jobs, and they were making, I'm going to say, more money. So in high school, it was a little tough. And I wrote about this actually because I had maybe, everything was based on, okay, how many outfits do you have?
Mm-hmm.
And I had about 7 combinations, and other people had 30. I had friends with, convertibles, and modern houses were being built there. One friend had her father was an architect. Another friend, there were bankers and people who seemed to be sophisticated in a different way than I knew. Because my family was, I'm going to say, middle class. A lot of people were a little above that. But I nevertheless went to school and had great teachers. Some people were getting nose jobs back then.
Yeah.
I never wanted a nose job, even though I have a bump on my nose. But there were people who had beautiful aquiline noses, who all of a sudden they come back with a ski jump nose.
Yes.
And of course, I personally think, and I studied in Italy, an aquiline nose is beautiful. Aquiline noses are just, they also hark back to a different culture for me. and I saw them quite a bit in Rome. But so
I think,
it seems strange.
yeah, I think I even have kind of like,
You have a nose that, yes.
it kind of bumps up and down.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've ever thought about getting rid of anything or tapering your nose, but I know that, I was reading about Richard Avedon, and Richard Avedon didn't like his nose and had it done early on.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that people have a problem with looking, I'm going to say it, too ethnic.
Mm.
That they think of themselves looking a certain way, or that they have seen too many ads that elevate a look that is, I'm going to say, more mainstream or whatever, according to the advertising agencies.
Yeah, what they would think is this is the best. This is what everyone knows should look like.
Yeah, I mean, I think women, unfortunately, and men too, have been exposed to these ads that tell them how they can look, and of course, I never thought about that for myself at all. So I think, unfortunately for certain people, they wanted to have what I call a ski jump nose, like Bob Hope, and, you go down the nose and you can go down. It's a ski jump, basically. It's so bad.
Yeah.
I think and some of them looked like they were done.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You look and you go, oh, nose job.
Mm.
I mean, Andy Warhol did the before and after.
Yeah.
The woman had an aquiline nose, and then the one on picture on the right was transformed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those kinds of, again, I tried to stay away from, and I also felt very different in high school than the other people.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like I fit in exactly, but my art helped me.
When did you start gravitating towards art? Was that even earlier, before high school, or?
Yeah. No, I was doing art when I was younger. I was doing cartoons. I made my own newspaper, and my sense of humor came across. Mm-hmm. I was, as I got more into high school, I was the art. I got the art award when I graduated because I painted. I took art classes in the summer. I did a lot of painting, and I loved being at school, actually, for the art. We had very good teachers. Across the board, we had great teachers, because they all came from Columbia Teachers College a lot. Mm-hmm. And they were top notch. They made us work.
Yes.
So, I was doing a lot of art, I would say, especially in my teens. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But just that environment in high school was like a different crowd that you didn't feel.
Well, you were always looking like, I'll never forget, my mother bought me a plaid coat, and then I had a plaid skirt. Mm-hmm. And I'd go to school. I think, oh God, plaid and plaid doesn't go together. But so the people, the girls in the school, I'd watch them, and of course we were all. Some of them, you're in high school. Some of them were very developed. I was tall and thin, and there was a lot of, you're developing, and the boys are paying attention to you. I was, and I always have been, I would say, an observer. So I'd watch, I'd take everything in. And I'd watch and do, my work, for school. And I did feel, I was, of course, learning at that point how to hold my feelings in. Because when I was having any feelings of attraction, I did not want anyone I thought I'd never fit in. So that began the time for me to control. And I do think people do this. They do it not with just what I went through, but also in other ways.
Yes.
Which we could, discuss too. But so I started to have feelings, and of course, notice. I remember there was one in the art room. Some young woman came in from somewhere else to be at Ardsley, and people were saying, "Oh, she's a lesbian." Mm-hmm. So of course, in the art room, I'd watch and look at her, mm-hmm. And I'd watch her look at my friend, who she would hang out with, and I knew that this lesbian was interested. Mm. So I'd watch her look at this friend I had, Sally, and of course Sally was straight, but I knew that this woman who was, and she was a lesbian too, mm-hmm. and kind of sophisticated, but I knew. I could see this desire come across her face. Yeah. I mean, I think it was probably the start of my, I think creative people really, you don't have to be creative necessarily, but I think if you are an observer, if you take other people in my case, I was taking other people in. Yeah. I was probably watching to see, okay, how am I going to be, because and I have to say, I also had some anxiety too at that point, because I somehow anxiety would come over me, and I think that was difficult because I never took any pills for it. Mainly because I was, the anxiety came over me because I think I thought I'd never be able to fit into the world. It's very hard sometimes. Mm-hmm.
Was this in the late 60s?
This was around 1963. Mm. When I graduated from high school in 1965. But I was probably I know I was at least a junior, mm-hmm. so it was like 63, 64 that I was mm-hmm. starting to have feelings of anxiety that would just come on me, where I'd feel like I was going to faint or that I couldn't live. I think underneath there was a subconscious, you have your subconscious that can affect you. Yeah. And of course I've done a lot of research on it, and I've my teaching too have come across students in my classes where they've talked about their own issues, let's say. So I mean, my own feeling about myself has helped me with my students mm-hmm. to become a good teacher.
Yes.
I mean, I think probably if you were a therapist, therapists have gone through stuff too, mm-hmm. and then you become I'm going to say empathetic to mm-hmm. What someone may be going through, and you want to decide how do you help a person,
Mm-hmm. At that point, what were you thinking you wanted to get out of that? Did you ever visit New York City at that point, or take the train in and?
No, because my parents weren't of that. First of all, they hated New York. Mm. I never really went into New York during my high school years. I had a friend who her father was a newscaster, and they took me to the Hawaiian room or someplace like that, and I got dressed up because they were in New York. They were sophisticated, I'm going to say. My parents didn't want to go to New York. And I remember going, and I had fun. But I wasn't aware of New York until later on.
Okay.
Yeah, I would go in when I was in college. When I would come home, I go in. I went to school in Buffalo. So I went away when I was 18, and I was upstate for 4 years pretty much. And it was during the 60s, the late 60s, 1965 to 69, during the Vietnam War, and also a lot of other demonstrations. So I would come home, and I would go down. I don't know how I may have driven. I would drive to Manhattan because I wanted to go shopping. They had better clothes in Manhattan. So I'd go down to 8th Street in the east side, where they had wonderful fur coats from the 1920s and 30s. And I remember buying a raccoon. I bought a raccoon coat. I'll never forget. I bring the raccoon. And then we were all wearing mini skirts up to our thighs. I bring the coat home, and I thought, I'm going to shorten the coat. So I take it up to my room. I cut the bottom off, and I had to hem it. And when I cut the bottom off, and I thought I saw something jump out of it, so I screamed, and my mother goes, what's wrong? And I said, oh, I think something jumped out of that coat. She said, what? She didn't like it. Why are you bringing that thing in this house? And so, of course, I shortened it, and there wasn't really anything in the coat. And I'd wear it, and that would be up to my thighs. Mm-hmm. And for a while, I was wearing a lot of raccoon coats. But, and bell bottoms were really in. And those bell bottoms would go down. They were low. They were on your hip. And you'd wear them, with a wide belt, and you'd look, it was like Jimi Hendrix, It was a cool time.
Yeah.
But New York really had a lot. I loved New York. I really did. When I got older, I loved it. I
like
was
at
more,
that point when you were still in college, it was. You think you were absorbing it differently at that time compared to when you came back later.
Right. I absorbed it differently when I was in college. I think also because I had gone to school. I was going to school in a big city. Buffalo is a big city. So I was experiencing that and realizing that city, Buffalo, had a lot actually that interested me, just in terms of the diversity. And so I prefer a diverse environment, actually, and I think I was getting into it. And also there were demonstrations in New York that I wanted to go to. I was becoming more politically aware, and so I started to prefer that. I mean, I did not prefer Ardsley because it was more. We did not have a black person in our school.
Yeah.
In Ardsley. Mm-hmm. So that was very homogenous. I mean, the people were all hardworking, but we did not have any. In fact, in Ardsley, I'll remember my parents were very. I'm going to say, they wanted to have a housing, affordable housing and it would have been for black people. My mother and father were against it, and they even voiced it in front of me. And at one point, they voiced that they were against it, and I said, "Well, my English teacher has been saying something that it's a positive thing," and my mother, I think, said to me, I think it was my mother, "She's trying to brainwash you." But you see, my teachers were coming from the city, and they were very smart and more broad-minded.
Yes.
And I never really was critical of my parents for lacking that broad-mindedness, but I knew that there was a difference. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I went to college, I came home once and I said, "Dad, what do you think if I go?" It was a black man. "What do you think?" And I was very blonde, and I was very attractive. I'm still not bad now, but but back then I had nice legs, long blonde hair. Really, people were after me. But I said, "What do you think if I'd go out with a black guy?" My father, no, don't ever bring him home. So, I mean, there was definitely a difference.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I was challenging him. I wasn't going to go out with him. I didn't think I would.
But at least asking your dad and seeing what his response would be, and
Right.
uh,
Right. I mean, they pretty much supported me in every way. I mean, paying for school. When I was in school in my junior year, I said I'd like to go to Siena, Italy to study. I was 20, and my teacher was taking a group, my ceramics teacher, and he said, "Why don't you come to Siena for 5 or 6 months to study abroad?" And I said, I'd love to. So my father and mother supported that. But I'll never forget when I came back totally transformed. I could speak Italian. My clothing changed. I was, I was influenced by the Italian culture and the clothing in Italy at the time.
yes.
And now too. I mean, the Europeans are so far ahead of us, I feel.
Yeah. But and then what were you studying for your undergrad?
I went to school for art ed.
For art ed. Okay.
Yeah, and the cool thing about that was I got to experience different courses. So we had a smattering, sculpture, jewelry, ceramics, painting, wood design, printmaking. It went on. And then we had education classes that taught us about how to teach. And then we did student teaching. But so I was well prepared to go out and teach, and I ended up at the end getting a job right away. I was pretty smart in some ways because when I graduated, I was involved with my husband-to-be, and I applied for jobs, and one of them was a high school teaching job near Rochester. And I'll never forget, I wanted that job. So what I ended up doing, it was the summer I had applied. The summer came, and I thought, I want this job. How am I going to get it? I called up the school, and I said, I really, really would like to teach at Pittsford High School. And I said, but I have been offered another job, and I have to let them know. I said, so do you think that maybe you could let me know if I'm being considered? I think they called me back in a day or two and said, we're offering the job to you. I had no other job. I lied. I can't believe I did it. But I think at the time I was involved with my husband-to-be, and I wanted to be there.
Yeah.
Near him, and we weren't married, but and so I got that job, and I was teaching there for about 7 years. But that's the thing. I think you have to think smart sometimes. I don't know. I mean, I don't. How you conduct your life is, but I knew that the goal was to get that job.
And then from there, did you eventually go back to school?
Well, what happened was I was teaching. I got married. We lived in Rochester, and my husband was also a teacher. And so for a while we were doing fine. And by the end of, say, I was about 29, it's interesting. He went back to school, and I put him through school for his master's. And then it was going to be my turn. But what happened was I started to have feelings for this former student of mine who was 10 years younger, who we had kept in touch, and then all of a sudden I was having feelings toward her. And so it would be like having, you could have an affair with anyone, but
Yeah.
so I didn't know what to do. So I told her one night, we were alone. I said, I'm having these feelings for you. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do about it. I said, I think we should stop seeing one another. And she said, I have the same feelings for you. And I looked at her and I said, I turned and I looked and I said, do you understand what I'm talking about? She says, yes. She felt the same way. Well, after we both said that, then within a week or so, we were in the local park late at night, getting started, let's say. I'm not going to go into the details. But there was a real pull at that point. But the thing that was hard for me was I had and I still know this man, I had a nice man for a husband. He was pretty good. Mm-hmm. Very good, actually. I mean, I don't know, when you're younger, I don't know how old you are, but when I was younger, I needed to know more about my body. And I don't think, I think when you're younger, well, maybe it's different now. Some people may know more, but I certainly needed to know more. Mm-hmm. So then I started this affair, and it was very hard because my husband and I had to go into therapy and figure out what we were going to do. He ended up, and at the same time, my jobs, they let me go from my teaching job because I didn't have enough credits or something. I forgot why, for master's credits. Anyway, and at the same time I was accepted to RIT. So I said, I'm going to go back to RIT. I kept on having this affair. My husband took a job in New York. I think he lost his job. He left, and we had a house. A real beautiful house, and I maintained it. He said, you take the house and do whatever you want. So I was going back to school. I had a wonderful time in school. I rented rooms out in my house to pay for we had a mortgage. And I spent 2 years in, the MFA program was 2 years, so. And then the affair ended because it wasn't a long-lived thing. And then I went, at that point, I was aware that I was really having more feelings toward women in general. Mm. And in Rochester was very gay-friendly. Mm. So. Yeah. So that started, and I'm going to say I was a late bloomer. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know other people who were even later than that, because mm-hmm. I think the whole issue around being gay at that point, for many people, was that you may have had guilty feelings or you felt uncomfortable about that, so you didn't really pursue it. I think gay men probably are freer that way and keep it under wraps. I mean, it wasn't an easy time. Yeah. I mean, I think as time went on, in fact, it's hard for me to understand it. It was, even when I was teaching, I would think, as I was teaching in the 2000s, I was teaching my students, and I even find it odd that they would have a hard time even now. But people still have issues because their families might be religious mm-hmm. or... was
that something that came up with your parents? Not that we have to.
No, I think that my parents wanted to know what was going on, so I told them. And that my father, the first reaction was, "Is the therapist telling you what to do?" And I said, "Dad, the therapist doesn't tell me what to do." I said, "We just discuss, a lot of other things, basically." So for about 2 years, I didn't see my parents because I was guilty. Also, I was in school and I was busy studying and trying to get my life together. And then they were in Florida, so I finally got on a plane and went down to see them. I think my father was much more liberal. He was much more accepting.
Mm-hmm.
My mother actually had a hard time with. I remember doing a nude of myself, which was published, and I sent them the book that I was in. It was a collection of women's self-portraits. I was nude in the picture. My mother, when I went down there, my mother. I said, "Did you get the book?" She didn't. My mother didn't like seeing me nude. She doesn't. I don't think she ever liked seeing anyone nude.
Yeah.
So my mother had issues around that. But what the heck am I going to do? I can't. That's her problem.
Here's my book, or Did you go check out the book? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I was proud of the fact that I got published. I was young, and. The book was about, and of course, it was a lot of women's stuff came out then. I mean, women's self-portraits. It was about by Joyce Tennyson Cohen. She was wonderful, Joyce Tennyson. I think she's still alive, but I was proud of myself, and I don't have issues around nudity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have issues around how one might express. And I said it the other day when I was doing my lecture. I always told my students, do not do any pictures that will compromise someone in any way or even compromise a living thing. So, I mean, and it's tough because you could find something that's very disturbing, maybe photojournalistically horrible things, that people will photograph, but they've occurred, and then the photographer is a documentarian of that scene, and of course several come to mind. One of the baby that was deceased on the beach because the baby never made it, that it was an immigrant, and the photographer came upon this horrible situation with a dead baby and photographed it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, some people may think that that's not appropriate, and I think you don't want to abuse someone who's already dead. In fact, I mean, I could go into this. This is a whole topic.
Yeah.
How photographers might take advantage of. But if it's hard sometimes as a photographer.
Mm-hmm. But were you studying specifically with photography at this time at RIT?
At RIT, it was only photography.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I got my degree in still photography, and I majored in color. So when I got out of there, I immediately when I had one full-time teaching job which I quit. I couldn't take it. I was in Pennsylvania. I couldn't take being there. Forget it. Too narrow. So I moved to New York with no money. I taught color at School of Visual Arts.
What year was
I was teaching there in 1980. Okay. I started teaching. It was so funny because I sent my resume out. That's another thing. I sent my resume out, and I sent it out on pink paper. Pink. So if it turned up on a desk, pink stands out. And the other thing I put on the resume, which I think is funny, that I was working, when I first came to New York, I worked as a Viva, V-I-V-A, temporary secretary. So I'd go into offices, I'd get a job for 1 week or 2 weeks, go in, sit at a desk, do whatever they needed, get paid, and I earned a living. So I put, I was a Viva temporary, Viva meaning life, Viva temporary secretary, until I started getting some part-time teaching jobs. So from then on, I only had part-time.
Okay.
Adjunct. I was an adjunct, but the School of Visual Arts was wonderful. Mm-hmm. School of Visual Arts had all these famous people. School of Visual Arts had people like Catherine McLaughlin-Gill, who you probably don't know. I'm trying to think of who else was there. And they would have like parties at the Guggenheim. Mm-hmm. So you'd be around people who were extremely sophisticated. People who were, well, and some of them weren't, but they were successful people. Mm-hmm. And they were all teaching part-time like me. So I taught color, and I taught color printing for a good, 15 years or so. I was in the darkroom. And I loved being there. It was fun, because you're around other people who were excited about photography, basically. And when I wasn't there, I was carousing around, going out, dancing around, meeting lots of women, having different relationships, learning a lot about. It was like an adolescence, basically. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Delayed. But, I lived with certain people for 6 or 7 years. And some of the people I lived with, some of the women, were very successful. So in one case, I'm still friends with her now, Ellen, I moved into her apartment at one point, and she had a corporate job, and I was still doing the secretarial work. Mm-hmm. And so she says, Joyce, don't do the secretarial work. She says, just do your own work. So here I am in this apartment, and I was living there, and I looked out the window one day. I was kind of like taking a break. And I look across, and I'm on 122nd Street. I look across, and there's a Jewish theological seminary. I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if they use freelancers. So I called them up, and I said, do you use freelance photographers for any PR events? Yes, we do. Send us your card. I said, why don't I just come over and show you some work? So they, okay. I said, I'm right nearby. A week later, I get a job. They call me up. Can you photograph Ed Asner and Alphonse D'Amato? They're coming to... I said, sure. So I had to practice. I had to get a flash, make sure that I knew what I was doing. I decided I better wear a suit. So I had a jacket and a skirt. I wore pantyhose. I looked good. Did the job, and they kept on using me after that. I had to bill them, at that point, $50 an hour, I think it was. Send them an invoice, do all the stuff that you're supposed to do. And the woman, Ellen, said, here's how you do the billing. She showed me, so I did the billing. And from there on, I started, if I'm doing this, maybe I could reach out over here. Because I was near other people, Manhattan School of Music. There was another seminary. So I started reaching out and feeling a little bit more like, hey. And Ellen also had told me, Joyce, don't pay the rent just until you get, and the rent was really low. That's a biggie in New York. So by the time a couple of months went by, I said, I can pay the rent.
Mm-hmm.
So I have Ellen, again, sometimes I've told my students this, sometimes you need a sugar daddy or a sugar mama because I felt like I was supported. It would have been hard for me if I was by myself to try to do that. But sometimes things come along because it's supposed to happen, that you can be independent. And you never know when it's going to happen. And with that, it happened to me, and I started to feel stronger about who I was. And at one point, Teachers College, Columbia U, was 1 block up. So I was all pumped up, and I said, I wonder if they ever need a photo teacher there. Yes. I called them up. Yes. We have an art education department. I went for an interview. I didn't get the job. It would have been, part-time. A year later, they call me up. They say to me, can you come and teach here now? I said, what happened to the person? What happened? Because they had told me they hired someone else. I said, what happened to the person that you hired? Oh, he didn't work out. None of the students liked him.
Yeah.
So I said to the chair, I said, I said, you know something? I said, I'm going to Italy. I had gotten a grant. I said, I'm going to Italy, so I'm not available. And she asked me about something. Well, can you do this? I said, well, I'll be available in the fall. So she was like saying to me, are you? And I'm telling her, you can wait for me. Not I wasn't mean, but the thing is I got busy.
Yeah.
And when I went to Teachers College, I was teaching graduate students who were teachers, and I started up a program, and I started advertising because I was at Teachers College, and then there was Columbia College. They didn't have any photo program. So I advertised, and all of a sudden I was teaching like 5-6 classes. Not getting paid that much, but I had a lot of people. So I was doing that. I was teaching at SVA, then I had my freelance. I would have to say since then, all I did was teach and freelance. So, and the freelance got broader as time went on. I started shooting for the 92nd Street Y because someone I met liked my work and she hired me to. So I was there for 15 years on a freelance basis, which was fun. All I did was have fun.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the key to work is, do you enjoy what you do? Mm-hmm. And I've always enjoyed the teaching. I loved it. I loved being with the young people. As I got older, I was older, and I felt more close to them when I was younger too. But as I got older, I had strong feelings of what they were suffering with, because some of them suffered with anxiety. A lot of them were taking pills to control their stuff. They let it out.
Yeah.
And then when I was doing the 92nd Street Y, and that was all from 2000 to 2015, I would go in, I'd be in the green room, I'd hang out with, Arthur Miller and, just watch him and other people, everyone. I have over 1,000 of celebrities in my repertoire.
Wow.
That I've shot. And the cool thing was that they were creative people who were very accomplished. But I had fun. When I say fun, I mean it was relaxing, and you're trying to get a picture, some kind of picture that might be even considered a portrait. But I did a lot of stage stuff where they were on stage.
Did you get to interact with some of these celebrities more closely? It's probably hard to pick, but did you have a favorite interaction with one of them out of...
It's interesting because I just posted Leonard Lauder. He passed away at 92, and I shot him when Evelyn, his wife, was alive, and they founded the Evelyn Lauder Breast Center in Manhattan. So I love, as I said earlier, love watching people. So, and kind of choosing the right moment to shoot. But Leonard, when I was around Leonard, after his first wife died, he married Judy Glickman. He was such a nice person. And he, Estee Lauder, he was a billionaire, I forget how much, and but he was not a snob. He was very kind. He was very present. He spoke in a way that was sometimes very funny, really ready for fun. Not that you have to have fun all the time, but he definitely was an easygoing feminist. So being around someone like that felt good. I'm trying to think of anyone who stood out. Some people have stood out as like, I did not like them.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had like Jerry Lewis. I have some good pictures of him. One night I get a call from him at 10 o'clock at night. The phone rings. Hi, Joyce, this is Jerry Lewis. It was like almost like, so I said to him, so where are you? I said, where are you calling from? I'm in Las Vegas. He says, and I really like the pictures you shot of me. I said, I can send you some contact sheets. So I did. He never ordered anything. But he was also the one that's, he was also not nice to some of the people who came in there who wanted, to just talk with him. Mm-hmm. And he even said to me at one point, what is the lens that you're using? It happened to be 35 millimeter wide angle. He says, you should only use a 50. I know all that, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking of Henry Cartier-Bresson. You're thinking of a normal angle of view. Hello, you don't want your head to be distorted, blah, blah, blah. It depends on how far away you are. So please don't give me this. So, I mean, I've had people, I forget who it was. Some of them they were a little loaded and they wanted me to, one guy, I forget his name now, the sports guy, wanted to do some self-portraits, and I have a picture of him and my camera and me. He's grabbing me and taking, I let him actually do it. But normally, I mean, I wouldn't, I'm pretty careful. Someone like Eve Ensler, who did the vagina monologues, she's a trip. I really respect, or Gloria Steinem, who is now, I think, 91 or 92. I photographed Gloria. And Gloria is just a brilliant woman, to be around. Someone like Joan Rivers, I mean, I really think Joan Rivers was, she was out on a limb with her humor at times, but she was really funny. Trying to think of other people. I did a whole bunch of fashion people, and they were 17 pictures were put in this fashion icon book that was done by Fern Malice of everyone. I mean, we had Andre Leon Talley, we had Michael Kors, Tom Ford, and they were all, all these pictures. It's not like I had close interactions with the people. they're all, journalistic. You watch, you try to get a good shot, a good expression, that kind of thing. So it wasn't like they were in a studio with me, like some people could be. And that was fine with me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I did other things. I did other kinds of studio pictures of people that were closer to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, like my the lesbian and gay work that's in the show.
Yes.
That stuff was, intimate, because I knew the people. I identified with them more because I knew them. So I got to be with them for a couple of hours.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's one thing to do a portrait like that and another thing to, have 15 minutes in a green room watching someone and then maybe an hour and a half on stage trying to get a good picture without them having a lousy expression.
Yes.
So, I mean, so that kind of thing is far different than doing an intimate picture, one-on-one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think for my work, it was, I have several different areas I think I did a good job in. I think my personal work is really what I like to do a lot, because that's more. I mean, when I would shoot for the Y or shoot a famous person, I'd have to be very careful about what I chose. In other words, you have to choose. You choose a positive picture. You choose a picture that makes them look good. You don't choose something that makes them look like, they're in, that they have depression or something.
Yes.
So, I mean, and one could do those kinds of pictures, which it depends on the situation. So there's the client factor, which you have to consider always. Who are you working for? If you're working for someone, you cannot, and they expect a certain kind of picture, well, that's what you have to deliver.
Yeah. But I was curious, just even through that time from the early 1980s and 90s, what did you think of New York City at that time and the environment?
Well, it was horrible because the AIDS the AIDS came about in the early 80s. I'm going to say when I first started to hear about it, people were getting sick with pneumonia that it wouldn't go away. So through the entire 80s, we were hearing about people dying, and they were actually showing many, many examples of well-known people who died. They died, and pictures were published. And during that time, I mean, I can't say I knew a lot of gay. Well, I was going to the Hamptons, and the people were getting infected and passing away. I probably could have been more aware, although, I mean, if I knew people personally, and which I didn't, of course it would have affected me. I wasn't exactly that political. I mean, I was struggling and living with someone at the time, Ellen. I was also, learning more about myself. I mean, I had come out in 1976, so it took me a while to just become aware of who I was, and that doesn't happen overnight. It didn't happen overnight for me. I was still learning more about myself, but the 80s were really tough. And then at the end of the 80s, well, when I was doing the diptychs, which I then got a grant for, I did feel acknowledged that they were acknowledging lesbian, gay couples, which I felt, wow. After I got that grant, I went to Italy. I went away. I wanted to. Well, I love Italy, so in fact, I'd like to go back right this
Right
minute.
now.
I would. But I have, I have things that I need to do here. And also, it's funny, I have a bird. So I have a bird that, it's like my son.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to try to get over that because I do think I need to do something for myself.
Mm-hmm.
But AIDS, during the 80s, it was horrible.
What about for yourself, just living in New York City, and did you felt comfortable for yourself walking around and going to different places?
Oh, yeah, no, in New York, I felt great.
Mm-hmm.
New York was liberating, and that's why I moved to New York.
Mm-hmm.
There were times, in New York where I'll never forget walking down the street, what I did sometimes. I remember I was with somebody, and we were on 6th Avenue in the 20s, and we had a lot to drink, so we started making out right on the sidewalk. And a car came by with a bunch of guys, and they started clapping. Yay! Even I would even say, because I did whatever I wanted. I was in the West Village once this was around 2008, right near Sheridan Square. I was with this woman, and we were right in Sheridan Square, and we went under a tree. It was a beautiful night, and we started kissing. Right? And everybody was walking by. They could give a flying hoo-ha. Except this one guy, a black guy happened to be. Oh, you two are beautiful. He comes closer to us. You are really beautiful. And then I'm thinking, well, we stopped. I said, thank you. Thank you very much. And I took some money out and gave him, a few bucks, because I'm thinking, And I forgot, when I gave him the money, he went away, and I didn't feel threatened. Of course, you wonder. But of course, I was putting myself out there in public. We both were. And, being passionate in public. And this was during, it wasn't exactly night. It was, in the summer, and it was still daylight. But I guess for me, I always felt the hell with it, once you've, I think in New York, one can be more, although, when I came here today, I thought I got out of my car and those two women were holding hands. I thought, were they sisters? No, I didn't. Could they be? No, I thought they're holding. But anyway, I think it's funny. I even more recently, and again, it was around 2008. I went out to some club. Men and women. We were sitting there listening to music. It was like a, forget a singer and so forth. And I was with somebody. And we were just very affectionate. We weren't kissing. And after the thing was over, this woman came over and she said, I don't know, maybe she was with a man. She said, I love watching the two of you. She says, you two were very affectionate. And no one else was like that. And I think she said something like that. And we both looked, oh, thank you. But, if two people, when you look at two people and you see how they relate and that they have, that they are on the same wavelength, it's really very pleasurable, I find. Not that you're being a voyeur.
Yes.
But people do notice, if you're in a social situation, you can kind of tell certain things about how people relate. And it was really nice to hear. But that's the kind of thing that you get in New York because New Yorkers are liberal, pretty liberal.
Yes.
In fact, I love New Yorkers. I think New Yorkers are, they're very demonstrative, and I think they're very caring. So.
And then I also wanted to ask, because you mentioned the diptych and even doing photographs in the 80s and 90s of gay and lesbian couples.
Right.
What really got you interested in doing that, or just did you feel like that was important at that time?
It's interesting, the reason I'd started to do it, I think probably to integrate more into the community, and also to find myself. I was in a relationship, so it wasn't like I didn't know. And that person, Ellen, that's when things started. I, even before that, wanted to photograph people I knew. I found them interesting. I found women and men too. They were of interest, and there was a need in me to see more of that. And I think it had to do with my own development. And as a lesbian, a woman who now wanted to understand her own sexuality and to own my own sexuality, and to observe others who were also attracted to one another. So that continued. I mean, the portraits that I did when I ended up, the social part of me, the social documentary part of me, the person who cares about people who are regular people, when I started to do portraits in 4x5, that was also about seeing other women who were together, but also about a community that I wasn't familiar with, that I would be exposed to if I went to an event where I was exposed to a diverse community and I could see different combinations. I wasn't aware of it exactly. I knew I had a need to do it, and also doing it, I thought, well, isn't it a good idea if I shoot a portrait and I can give a Polaroid to the person? Now, today, of course, that Polaroid 4x5 is gone. If you did anything, and I did it with digital, if you shoot digital, I could take the memory card, which I did, and put it into a little printer and make some 4x6 prints on the spot.
Yes.
And I did do that. I got kind of tired of I didn't do it right away. I was getting into, first of all, digital. I had to understand. I had to get into it. I was a film person, and then I had to learn digital. So everything that I did, I had a tutor. I hired a tutor, because when you do digital, I had to download and put my stuff into Lightroom, which is an Adobe program, and manages your pictures. And so I had to learn that. But the cool thing about digital, I love it. Instant, and also addictive. The iPhone is addictive. Very. Also, the iPhone now, you're shooting RAW. Wonderful. I told Sally I'm getting another iPhone soon. Why? Because the sensor is bigger. I think it's twice as big as what I have now. But it's still a small sensor. But I'm happy with the pictures. And I'm older now. I can't be lugging around. I don't want to lug around stuff.
Do you do any more film as much? No.
No.
Yeah.
No, in fact, I sold my 4x5. I sold my Hasselblad. No, I'm older now, and also, I'm looking at my life differently. Some people might continue with but I don't have a dark room. I don't have access to one. No, and I don't want to stand on my feet for 5 hours. You go into a dark room, you don't go in there for 1 hour. You go in for 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
You know, printing.
Yes.
Printing and washing and, the whole 9 yards if you do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you... there was another portrait series you did, the Alzheimer's.
Oh, well, that...
With
yeah.
A Change of Mind is...
Right. So that particular body of work was at the Albuquerque Museum in 2003. I proposed... I don't know. Oh, well, I like New Mexico, so I was out there. I went to Albuquerque and Santa Fe. In fact, I could see myself living there. But, and I met the curator at the Albuquerque Museum, and I said, I've got a bunch of pictures about Alzheimer's. I had started to do them because I would visit my family, and I would shoot, but and then my father had Alzheimer's. He was diagnosed, and that took a while actually for that to be diagnosed. And then I was looking at my pictures and thinking, I'm gonna formalize. I'm gonna print some of these because I was shooting color negative film, and I get the little prints back. So I started to think, So I proposed a show, and they liked it because Alzheimer's hadn't really been looked at photographically. I think Joel Meyerowitz looked at Alzheimer's in his own father, and I thought he did it with a film, movie film. So I had an exhibit of about 50 prints at the Albuquerque Museum, and we blew them up. I was, oh my God, when I think about that. I printed them myself.
Wow.
And I printed some of them, I think they were 40, they were big. Because in the show, I had some bigger ones and some, that were smaller because you don't want to have everything. I didn't want to have everything the same size. I mean, it's tough to have a show somewhere else. I mean, in Albuquerque, beautiful museum, but you have to have a following. The cool thing was they did a catalog, and I raised money to have it done. I don't know if I think I paid for most of it. Mm-hmm. And it was printed in China, and it basically, for me, capsulizes the work because I had interviews in there as well. It was educational. So I think, like, when you do photography, there are times when you want to have text and information, especially with a project like that. So I felt like and I have a lot of catalogs. In fact, I was thinking, should I bring some here and sell them for a few bucks on Friday night? I don't know. That's ridiculous. It's a totally different project. Mm-hmm. I'll ask Sally what she thinks, but to me, it's like I want to keep it to one thing. Mm-hmm. But I think, like, right now, Christopher, for me, I need to think about, okay, how am I going to get some of the work that's in the show into a book, book form, and not have it be here and there, and I think, I wish I had thought about it sooner, actually. But I think Sally Grant did a great job curating. She really is a good curator.
Yes, definitely.
So and the reason is because of her extreme attention
to detail.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. She's very, very good. And also for the library, I think Sally also has, she's a very good networker who puts people in touch with other people. And I think that's another job of a curator too. And also to be an advocate for the person that you're curating, whose art you're curating.
But how did this exhibit come about? We Are Multitudes.
Well, I know Janet, who is here, and I love her. And I proposed last fall to Janet, we had talked about it, doing a workshop called Meaningful Pictures, which I'm going to do right now I've gotten to the point where, okay, I wouldn't mind teaching a little bit. So that would be a teaching experience about pictures that are meaningful to people who might want to understand, okay, how do I choose pictures? I mean, that's an area of my expertise. Not that I give answers, but that I help people kind of choose or to separate their pictures and to figure out what they're trying to say, let's say. So Sally was around when I was talking to Janet, and she said, well, and I said, Sally, I think you should have a show for Gay Pride next year. I said, now that it's taking off, because we're in the third year now. And then it was kind of like we had a dialogue, and I thought, okay, that would be a great show, and it could be, I said, like a group show or something. And then I guess Sally started to think about it, and then at the end of March this year, she said, okay, I want to do a show. I met with her. She said, I have another person that I'm going to see, a painter, I think. And then she came back to me and said, Joyce, she came to my house. She looked at my work and she said, I think it should just be you. And all of a sudden it like, boop, 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 it came together. And the stuff that's in the case, it's like we're on the same wavelength. I had showed her some of that work and it stuck in her mind because that work was more transformative. That work with the text is very different from the work that I started to do because it showed the conflict that I was in and I think the psychological state that one could be in. So she wanted to display that work and that's what we did. And then the portrait work, the diptychs, the portraits of 4x5, and then the Gay Pride from New York and also from Greenport. So it became like 4 sections, let's say, which is what the show is. And Sally is just great. She said, I was at the Whitney, and she said, I want to do the text, and I want it to be glued on the wall the way, I can't think of who's being shown there right now. But they glue it to the, and she showed me the picture she took. And she said, I'd like this kind of style, which is Helvetica, I think. And she said, so she's excited about how she decided to do the show in terms of a more sophisticated way, similar to the Whitney. She copied the Whitney, basically.
No, but that's really nice.
I thought it was, hey, she is... I don't know if she sleeps at night. I mean, she probably does. She probably knows how to relax. But boy, I can't think of who's showing at the Whitney. But Sally has said to me, your work needs to be in the Whitney. So, I mean, she's very positive, and that's great. Of course, we have to figure out. I thought, who is there at that Whitney that I need to get to know? The guy that was there, Adam Weinberg, he, I think, retired in 2023. He was the head. And I had met Adam Weinberg years ago when he was just a budding whatever. People change. They go from one place to the next, which is fine.
Yeah. But and then I was curious, because you had mentioned coming out to the Hamptons and the South Fork, but I was curious when you first came to the North Fork.
That's a good question, because I had a partner who rented here in the early 90s, and so I came out here, and I also, in the 80s, I came out because someone I knew had a home in Southold.
Oh, okay.
So I was familiar with the North Fork, and And as time went by, I would go back and forth. I was in Southampton in the 90s renting. I'd always rent on my own or share a house with people. And then as I got into the 2000s, well, when 9/11 happened, I said to myself, I got to probably have a house someplace. Not that I had the money, but I thought, so I can get away from the city. Because it was terrible at 9/11, even though I was uptown, it was like I could smell everything. And so I started looking, and I thought, I don't know if I can afford. I knew I couldn't afford the Hamptons. So my friend out here in 2005 said, oh, there's a house for sale. Why don't you come out and take a look? And I looked at it, and it was the house I finally bought. It's a small 2-bedroom house, all on one floor. And I loved it the day I saw it. It was 2005. And I made an offer, and that was that. And I got the house. And after that, all I did was come out here in the summer mostly. Mm-hmm. I had to work, so I would take off in the summer. Yeah. And the house needed to be renovated. It needed lots of changes, so all I did was work on the house. And now the house, it's hard for me to work on it because I'm older now. I don't feel like I want to. I'm a little tired of that. But I did a lot of physical stuff. And spent money, which I love spending. I loved if I had it at the time, so I did it. And I'm happy to have a small house. And I would say if you get a house, think of getting older because you do not want to climb stairs. Mm-mm. So, keep everything easy. And I would say get a house, with also smaller, eventually it's like, what do you really need? Mm-hmm. Do you need if you have relatives, yeah, if you have a family, okay, you're going to need bedrooms maybe.
Yeah, but
blah, blah, blah.
What's necessary? You don't need to go overboard with extravagant, over-the-top things that...
After a while, when you look at, especially when you age, and of course you're not really maybe thinking about that. I think I probably did think about that, though. I think also having 2 bathrooms is a good idea in any house, whether it's, yeah. No matter what. So I, right now I'm at a point where, okay, I'm staying in my house. I still have, my health is pretty good. I don't have really issues that some people have. And some people I know have gone into Peconic Landing because of the health, because they've changed. So...
I was just curious, what did you think of Greenport and the area out here, even from 2005, and maybe even how it has changed since then? Well,
I think in some ways it's changed. Stores have closed. Mm-hmm. I think, but on the other hand, the Sapin Theater has been financed. That was a big change, and also will attract people the way Sag Harbor and the Sag Harbor Theater attracts people. So I think what I can't think of his name now. The person
Tony
Spiridakis. Yeah, Spiridakis, correct? Yes. Yeah. So I think what Tony did was to raise the money, and of course, the theater is a big attraction because of the arts. Mm-hmm. I think he has created a huge change. On the other hand, we have places like the Arcade, which is stagnating. Mm-hmm. That to me is a horror show. And then the near the Chase Bank, the place that's set back that across from the leather place, can't think of it, but that's not occupied, and it was for about a year a gallery for VSOP, the guy who can't think of his name either, but now that's not occupied. And so, but the good thing I heard was that the place that sold mattresses, the big old Victorian building was now bought and is being renovated.
Yes.
And they have a huge space in there. So I love that building. But of course, to do the work, it's going to take a lot. And I wonder what I think it's a woman who bought it, what is she going to do?
Yeah.
I'd like to just stop in there and try to meet that person. But it's across from the pizza place. And that place, I'm thinking, what's going to happen? Nothing is happening there. And it hasn't been so for several years. So it's like there's partially good things. And then there's other things that you know, need to shift.
Yes, definitely.
So that, I think I mean, I don't know when that's going to happen, or I could see it changing, at some point, and all of a sudden, maybe the pizza place will be bought and knocked down, and maybe something will go up. Who knows?
Yeah.
But, I mean, as I'm just thinking of of Front Street, the village is a very lovely place, and it's very calm. I mean, you can go there and be there and no one's around, which I kind of like during the week. Of course, the summer is going to be different.
Yeah.
So in 20 years, I've seen it. I used to like to, in fact, somebody interviewed me and they said, why did you buy your house? I said, because I like the arcade. I used to like to go into the arcade.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they sold penny candy. I could get a flannel shirt there. You could,
a little
everything.
bit of everything. You didn't have to order something online or go to Riverhead.
Right. And there were people there. You have a dialogue with the local, the people who are working there.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it. That was the department store. And, for a small town, you had department stores like that. But now it's turned into a place that, they're not, whoever owns it is not addressing.
Yeah.
You would think that could change and it could become something else.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't get that, why the person is not putting it on the market. There's also a home not that far from us that I pass. I've been passing that for like 30 or 40 years, and it's falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
A real old, beautiful home.
Mm-hmm.
But now I don't even know if that's salvageable.
Yeah, it's just gone too far.
Yeah. I mean, who the heck is going to want to even try to preserve that? I mean, I have no idea. That's would be a huge endeavor.
Yes. And then I think I just had like one other question, just kind of looking back. I mean, I feel like some artists might not like a question where they tell the viewers what they should think, but looking back over your career, what do you hope people would see or feel when they look at your photographs?
Well, I think with the portraits they would see that here was a person. I could cry. Here is a person who made contact with the people that she was photographing because she loved them, because she sympathized with them. Here was a person who chose her pictures carefully to show the ones that she considered ones that really expressed who her subjects were and are. And she did not mince words. In other words, in terms of a visual context, she did not mince words and tried to be accurate. I mean, I had a question the other day about truth, because now, of course, pictures cannot be truthful. And of course, there is something to be said about what you choose as a photographer to show. Most of the time, I think my pictures are truthful and try to capture something that is not based on AI or has been terribly manipulated. So I come from the old school there. Not to disparage someone who does do something different than me. You can do whatever you want as a creator. But my pictures are social documents. My pictures depict certain times that I feel are important, and people that need to be seen.
Yes.
And that's about all I can say there.
Yes. Absolutely.
This is why I like to wear this sweatshirt, because it serves many purposes.
No, but I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today and share your story and all the work you've done through your career. And please come out to the show. Actually, it will be going on for a while, but we have the opening this Friday. So, but thank you so much for taking the time to come on today.
You're welcome. It's great talking with you, and you asked some really good questions.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 126 with Joyce Culver. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library Podcast, and we'll see you next time.